I tried getting a job very, very hard and I couldn't do it. And my options were go on social benefits or start a business. And going on social benefits would have been easier, but it would have damaged my mental health even more. Hello everyone. Today I want to talk a little bit about building a creative career as a foreigner in Denmark. So in the past few months, my channel has seen a little bit of growth. I've been getting new followers and I've been getting some private messages of people asking me very similar questions, basically saying that they're interested in moving to Denmark and trying to build a creative career here, similar to what I've done. So I thought I made a video about it because here I can expand on it a little bit more. I can give a bit of a more in-depth answer, hopefully, and reach more people as well. And before we get into the actual answer to this question, I would like to make a couple of disclaimers. So for one thing, obviously this is very heavily based on my opinion and on my experience. As anything you find out there, I would suggest that you take it with a very healthy bag of salt. And that if you are serious about moving to Denmark and starting a career here, this is not your only source of reference. And talking about subjectivity, I have often been accused in my private life of being too negative. And I think that might come up with how I answer this question. I do strongly believe in being honest, and sometimes that means being a bit negative, I guess, because I can tell you that everything is great and you'll be fine and you can achieve anything you want, but I'm not here to sell you some kind of course. I don't want to build any unrealistic expectations because I think that can put people into much more harm than actually being too negative, because what's the worst that can happen if you're prepared for the worst and things don't go that bad? You just end up having easier time. Who wouldn't want that? On the other hand, expecting the worst might mean that someone will give up before they even try. And I don't think that's the best either. I think one should just look at as much information as possible and just make their own conclusion. I'm not the authority on moving to Denmark and on being a creative anywhere. And neither is anyone else. So the experience will be different for different people. So no one can really tell you the one truth. First of all, how are you going to do the move and get the permission to work in Denmark? So for me, I had it pretty easy because I'm an EU citizen. Also, I moved here 14 years ago when that was also easier, because over the years there have been increasing anti-immigration sentiments, not just here, but unfortunately everywhere, which has made the increasingly more hostile governments create increasingly more hostile legislations for people looking to move here. The worst changes have been for the non-EU citizen. And I would say that right now, if you are from a country that is not a member of the EU, coming here would be really, really difficult, especially as a graphic designer, visual artist, whatever, because these are not jobs that are very well paid and very highly sought after. You probably have the best chance if you are in some kind of engineering industry, IT, software. You manage to get a job before coming and you are given a quite high salary. If that's not the case, things get difficult. And to be honest, I don't know about all of the rules and regulations. I'm going to put some links in the description where you can read more about it. And so if you got all that legal stuff out of the way, another thing that you have to really be prepared for is the cost of living. I assume that most people looking to move here are probably looking to move to Copenhagen because that's probably the best place for a foreigner to live in Denmark because it's the most international friendly and where you would be treated the best. I personally started in a much smaller town in the north called Aalborg. I also lived for 2 years in another even smaller town called Herning, and it wasn't great. Especially at first, until getting used to it. I think I was part of the first wave of international students to this small town, and you could tell that the locals were very much not used to foreigners, and they could tell we are foreigners by, in some cases, the way we look, and because we spoke English or other languages, and they really, really didn't like that, and they made it very clear, often in very direct and very unfriendly ways, but that's stories for other days. I would say in Copenhagen, first of all, by the time I moved here, I think there have been foreigners in Denmark for a bit of a longer time, so people have gotten a bit more used to. And of course, Copenhagen is a bigger city and people are a bit more open and used to at least tourists. So I definitely haven't had those sharply negative kind of experiences here as I've had in the more provincial towns. But the thing about Copenhagen is that it's very, very expensive. So if you're moving here, or even in the smaller towns, I would recommend you have quite substantial savings. It's also what I did before coming, because it will be hard to get a job right away. It might take a very long time, even if we're talking about a non-skilled kind of job. Also, getting accommodations is really hard. First of all, really hard to find. Second of all, very expensive. Regarding the cost of living, I'm going to put some link in the description. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about the environment. Not the environment in terms of nature and pollution and that kind of stuff, but the atmosphere, the general life stuff. So even though Denmark and the Scandinavian countries as a whole are probably some of the best places in the world to live as an average citizen, that's not necessarily the case for foreigners. There is this very idealized image of Denmark, of the happiest country in the world, the hygge, the work-life balance, the family-friendly life, cleanness, the sustainability and environmentally friendly, mostly greenwashing, the social security, the high wages, safe environment, great food, and all of these things, they're totally true. They are here, they exist, definitely. They're facts. However, they're not necessarily for the foreigners. I mean, no one is actively preventing you access from those things. Well, in some cases they are, because there are a lot of the social safety nets that are not accessible to foreigners until they've been here for a certain number of years. And it's complicated depending on where you come from and so on and so on. We are not going to get into that, but it could take a long time until you have access to the same privileges that the Danes have. So it is very important to keep in mind that that might not be your experience, especially at first. And especially if you're coming here on your own without any kind of connections here. Quite often, Denmark is rated as one of the worst countries to live as a foreigner. And generally what many people who have lived here for longer or shorter times would tell you is that it's hard to meet people, especially Danes. It's hard to make friends. It's hard to get into the life. Personally, for me, I would say that the biggest difficulty for me has been the ever-changing social circle around me. Because I have been here for so long, I've had to change friends so many times. Maybe on average every 2-3 years, I will have to change my social circle completely from scratch, because either I'm moving or my friends are moving or we just grow apart, all kinds of reasons. And it can get hard. Personally, I guess I'm doing kind of okay, because also I don't have huge social needs. I can spend long periods of time being on my own and being very happy with that. But sooner or later, it does have some effect on you. So yeah, generally speaking, it's not the most friendly, accepting, welcoming space. Now, let's talk a little bit about the Danish market, particularly for creative work, and how that may impact your building of a creative career here. The thing is, the market is very small and very local. To me, it feels like Denmark is just one big village. Like everyone knows everyone, and once you are in the inner circle and the inner group, things will probably work out. But for as long as you're on the periphery, you will struggle. And I feel like for 14 years, I've been at different times very close to getting kind of like more into the circle, but then moving out again. So I would say I've mostly stayed on the periphery, and I know that to a large extent that's my own failing because I'm not very strategic with my socializing. I'm not very good at networking. I'm not great at creating this kind of professional relationships. I think for me, for my relationships, what matters a lot is authenticity and feeling a genuine connection. So that means that I mostly connect with people who are very similar to me, which is great, and we all need that. But in professional sense, people who are doing similar things, they're not going to hire each other. You need a versatile network in order to get jobs, whether that's full-time employment or freelancing gigs. And when I can't feel this sort of personal connection with someone, I just end up putting basically no effort into that relationship, and it just falls apart. Even if I do meet these people who might need my help as a designer or illustrator, but I'm just not good at maintaining those relationships. So we might work together on a project and then kind of lose touch. Another thing that I kind of touched upon earlier is the cost of living and how that is going to impact your creative career. It's a place with a very high standard of living, which means you need a lot of money to sustain basic life. And getting into the local network is difficult. So you might think that, well, I'm just going to find clients online and get international jobs. But the problem is that compared to the Danish standard, these are paid so poorly that most of the time they're not worth even starting your computer, I would say. For the most part, overseas clients, they are looking for professionals abroad because they want to get the job much, much cheaper. And you're just not able to compete with that. And I used to think that, well, if I'm really, really good, they'll have to pay for my skills. But turns out that really doesn't play that big of a role. And even if it did, the world is big and it's full with a lot of people who are really, really good. And it's just not enough. Another maybe more subtle thing is that if you're working with local clients, you would have to adhere to the Danish aesthetic. I guess I'm somewhat lucky in that because it really appeals to me, and because I studied here, I kind of picked it up naturally and I'm kind of gravitating to it, even though I would say that my style is still really not totally Danish. It definitely has its own spin on it, and I'm happy with that. But there were times when I felt like maybe my style wasn't Danish enough. And what I mean by that is that what is favored here is style that is very, very minimal, very clean. Colors are illegal, layouts that are too busy, too exciting. That's a no. Everything has to be very simple, very clean, very like straight lines, bare bones. And I have a bit of a love-hate relationship with that because I do like the very minimalistic look as a frame, so to say. I feel like it's very nice to start with something very clean and very basic, but I do like to spice things a little bit. So if your style is more colorful and chaotic, that won't be appreciated. And it seems to me that most places around the world would have a lot of different subcultures, and you'll be able to find your niche in a place like Berlin or London or New York or whatever. But Copenhagen is not like that. Sure, of course, there are small subcultures here and there that favor their own different style, but the mainstream is very big and very mainstream, and it's very much the same. That's something that was one of my first culture shock moments, seeing that all the Danes pretty much wore the same clothing, the same covers. Every home looks the same, has the same furniture, the same iconic lamps and chairs and whatever, the same Danish design staples. And everyone pretty much seems like they want the same thing. And you have to kind of adjust to that. So at some point, I had a lot of interest in working in publishing and doing illustration for kids' books. And I still have interest in that. When I was doing research in what are the opportunities to illustrate books for Danish publishers, it turns out that they don't really exist very much. Most of the books that are being published are foreign translations, and the artwork is kept the same as the original. So there isn't really a lot of work in illustrating books, for example. And I think most people who do it in Denmark do it for foreign publishers. Most illustrators that I've met seem to make most of their income from drawing storyboards for commercials, and I'm really, really not excited to do that. And I'm really not interested in that. But apparently that's where the biggest market for illustration is. Unemployment rates among graphic designers are pretty high, and salaries are on the lower end. And in terms of illustration, there are no full-time jobs for illustrators. Everything is project-based. So again, it's an industry that is very hard on your mental health. It's very hard on your finances and your prospects for the future. And as I mentioned, I don't want to sound too negative, but that's what I've seen in my experience. And the only people that I've heard being extremely positive about all this are the people who sell you courses about how to be creative, how to be an illustrator, how to be whatever. And yeah, I'm sure they're making good living out of those courses, but how much of what you learn there is applicable? All right. Now let's talk a little bit about looking for full-time employment as a graphic designer and foreigner in Denmark. In my experience, there is a huge competition for these positions, and there is not a lot of them. And that's probably anywhere in the world. Again, it's not that specific to Denmark, but here you are competing with the natives, which will always be preferred because they will always speak Danish more perfectly than you. They will always have better networks than you, and networks are very, very important in Denmark. The majority of positions are filled through network. When you're not local, you don't have your family and your friends from high school or whatever to tell you about jobs. The jobs that end up being posted, some of them are already filled by the time they're being posted. Most of them are being filled through internal networking means and not through the application process. And that's something that I've been told during a job searching course. It is what the official statistics shows, and everyone in Denmark knows that. It is very hard and unlikely to get a job through applying for jobs. And in the design industry, I would say it's even harder. But yeah, in total, I've been looking for jobs for about 3.5 years, very intensely, constantly updating my CV and my applications and writing in Danish and going to interviews, speaking Danish and trying to network and trying to do all the things. And the highest I made it was to the second round of interviews, but I was never offered a job. I've done a ton of internships. It hasn't worked out for me. I'm not saying it never works for anyone, but I don't think it's as helpful as it's hyped up to be. I did meet my boyfriend through one of those internships, so I guess that was good. The language barrier is, of course, a factor. Even though I speak some Danish, definitely not as good as a Dane. I don't know if I'll ever be as good as a Dane. And I'm trying to not talk about it too much because I know it invites all kinds of discussions that I'm not sure I want to start. But discrimination is a factor as well. It is hard to prove, but it's absolutely there. One of the reasons I wanted to work abroad and not in my own country is because I thought that abroad you are appreciated for your skills and not for who you know. But it turns out that nepotism is a thing everywhere. It's just called networking here. Another thing, I thought that in Scandinavia you wouldn't be discriminated against as a woman. Well, while they are probably better about this than the rest of the world, I won't say they haven't achieved the perfect equality. Like, it hasn't happened yet. It is better, but it has way to go. I don't think I've had an interview where I haven't been asked about my family plans and about my status. Am I married? Do I have a boyfriend? Are we having children? When are we having children? Yes, they do ask you that. Are they allowed to ask you that? I don't think they are. I can't imagine why would they want to know this unless they mean to discriminate against you on that front. And then it matters where you're from. Are you planning to go back? When are you planning to go back? How long do you plan to be in Denmark? Not to mention that in many places you will be discriminated against on the mere fact that they cannot pronounce your name, which is a problem that I have. And also the way I look is very non-Northern European. Can't imagine that helping me. And if you think that I'm just complaining and just looking for excuses, cool. Nice to see you. Have a nice life. And I guess if I am to try and make things a little bit more positive and give a bit of hope, I would say that what I've seen success with for myself is when I forget all the advice and all the things that are supposed to work and all the things that you're told to do in order to get a job or this or that, and try to find my own creative solutions. Because at the end of the day, I am supposed to be a creative person, and that doesn't just mean that I can draw pictures. It means that I am a creative problem solver, and sometimes you have to apply that to your own career. And the times when I've done that is when I've had the biggest successes. So if you are trying to build a creative career in Denmark or anywhere as a foreigner or as a local, I would try and forget about all the advice and all the hacks and all the things and try to find your own way and try to approach it as a puzzle or a game. And to also remember that when things don't work out, it's not your fault. There might be things you're doing wrong. There might be things you can improve on, but it's never 100% your fault. And I don't think that's a helpful way to think about, because there are 1,000 factors affecting every outcome, and there may be 2 or 3 that are within your control, and there's so many that are not. All you can do is try and weave your way around that, because there is only so much you can control, and it is very important to try and be nice to yourself and not blame yourself for all your failures. And I need to get better at that too. And at the end, I also want to talk a little bit about self-employment. In Denmark, it is very easy to start your own business. It depends actually on what kind of business, but for the purposes that I think we are talking about, for a sort of sole proprietorship, that's pretty easy. You can get online today, register, and your business is open tomorrow, more or less. It's very easy. You don't have to pay anything to start with. But of course, there is a lot of information that you have to get familiar with and keep in mind. And that's a whole thing. You can find it online. It's very doable. But there are a lot of things that being a business as opposed to employee doesn't really change a lot of the environmental factors that we talked about, like the language, like the network. You still need those things, whether you're trying to get a job or get your own business off the ground. So I found this interesting statistic that says that actually foreigners start businesses at a higher rate than Danes, especially non-Western foreigners, because Danes like to look at foreigners as Western and non-Western. Very interesting. And unfortunately, they see higher rates of failure than Danes. And unfortunately, Danes make twice as much from their businesses than foreigners do. I mean, not unfortunately, I have no problem with Danes. I'm really happy for them. But I am sad that the foreigners are making so little. And why is that? I came across this article that really annoyed me. The article was from 2011, 12, something like that. So it's a bit dated and I couldn't find something more recent. There probably is. I just didn't search that hard. But about this article, according to this business bro who wrote the article or was interviewed for the article, something like that, foreigners start more businesses because they're just so much more entrepreneurial. They want to stand on their own. They don't want to depend on the government, unlike those lazy Danes. And sure, that's maybe true for some people, but in my experience, why I started a business and why I think so many foreigners are starting businesses is because we have no other choice, frankly. I tried getting a job very, very hard and I couldn't do it. And my options were go on social benefits or start a business. And going on social benefits would have been easier, but it would have damaged my mental health even more. The way that system treats you is not very mental health friendly. And the thing is, I've always been interested in self-employment. I always wanted to be self-employed for basically as far back as I can remember. So it's not that I'm forced, really. It has always been my end goal. But I did want to get some experience through employment first. I definitely didn't feel ready to be self-employed, but I didn't see any other choice. And especially for those non-Western foreigners, a lot of them, they don't have the right to get any kind of help. So if no one would hire you, what are your choices? Yes, you're going to try and hire yourself and you are on your own here. You have no help. It's much harder as a foreigner to get a loan. So yeah, your business is more likely to fail. You don't have the social support. You don't have the support of the government. You don't have the support of friends and family because they're not here. And you end up making less money because it's harder to stay in business. It's harder to make business. Anything is a lot easier for the Danes than it is for the foreigners. And of course it is. I understand that it's Denmark and it's built for the Danes. But I just hate how immigrants so often are not really seen as people, but as tools to spread one message or the other. For some, it's convenient to paint us as we're stealing jobs and we're ruining the economy and we're chilling on social benefits. And for others, it's like, yeah, foreigners are so entrepreneurial. We should stop giving benefits to those lazy Danes, see what they can do if they didn't have all these benefits. And it's none of these people really cares about people having good lives. And how do we do that? In this article, this guy says that it's a cultural difference. The foreigners, they're more proud. They want to be independent. And I think most people want to be independent. No one wants the job center breathing in your neck and telling you you're a piece of shit that should get off your lazy ass and get a job. But as a foreigner, you have less options. And also there is a lot more stigma for foreigners being on social benefits than Danes. I'm not sure that the foreigners are more proud and independent. We just really do have less of a choice and fewer opportunities. And we are judged harder whatever we do. This has already been insanely long and I think it's time to stop here. I don't know how this came out. I don't know if I was complaining too much. I don't know if it was too negative, but what I'm trying to do is just share my experiences, share my view, and hopefully that's helpful to someone. If you want to move to Denmark to try and be creative here, you can do that. I think it's possible. Are there places that are probably better suited for that? I think that's probably the case. I'm quite certain it is. I'm trying to come up with a conclusion and I don't know what my conclusion is. Just be engineer instead, or a software developer, or like a biochemist, whatever. I don't know. Like, don't be illustrator. It's overrated. Like, just get that juicy engineering degree. Yeah, I think that's where it's at.